Good afternoon. My name is Steve Bentley. I'm with the Calgary Climate Hub, and welcome to our daily COP28 coverage. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, the Yaxi Nakota Nations, the Métis Nations of Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. I'd like to also make a second land acknowledgement on behalf of another group of folks that have a stake in this land that we stand on today, and that is our children, our nieces and nephews and grandchildren, and all future generations. I urge you to keep them in mind during this time as we face unprecedented change and start making decisions about what comes next. Okay, so COP28, we're more than halfway through this global conference, the only really of its kind, the biggest climate conference on the planet and in history. Countries of the world come to this to make promises. Often they're delivering projects ahead of time for kind of bragging rights. All sorts of great big impressive things can happen and important deals, but there's also all sorts of reasons to be cynical. And of course, this year we have far more representation from oil and gas than ever before. That's something we'll be digging into with our guests very shortly. But some big topics for this year: a global stock taking. That's a process for countries and stakeholders to see where they collectively are making progress towards meeting the goals of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and perhaps more importantly, where they're not. Historic agreement on health. Health has not been mentioned in the previous 27 COPs, and or at least not officially, and so that's kind of a big deal, especially for some of our friends at the Canadian Association Physicians for the Environment, for example. There's a historic loss and damage fund for the world's richest countries to help the world's poorest and most vulnerable countries that are hit by climate disaster, largely not of their own making, to help them start mitigating and adapting and preparing themselves for even worse climate devastation to come. There's been a global a call for an agreement for a global tripling of renewable energy and doubling energy efficiency by 2030. Methane emissions. Canada has signed on for 75% reduction of methane emissions from the oil and gas sector by 2030. Of course, the big debate remaining, and perhaps throughout the entire COP28, the entirety, is talk of a fossil fuel phase out versus an unabated fossil fuel phase out, which relies heavily on the very controversial technology of carbon capture and storage, something activists have quite a lot of skepticism around, and with suspicions that this is an untested technology that is largely so that oil and gas can continue doing as they always have, and oil and gas doesn't have a great record, in fact a really terrible record of saying they're going to do what they are going to do on climate, or even speaking truthfully on climate. So it's a time of immense hope, a time of immense cynicism, and more cynicism arguably than ever before. No, I'm not arguably. It's certainly more cynicism than ever before, due to the fact that they've appointed, it's being held in a petrostate, and they have appointed an oil and gas corporate executive as the president of the climate conference. So just some headlines that have come out regarding that. These are exactly the kind of headlines you don't want to have coming out of your climate conference. COP president denies using summit for oil deals. COP president says there's no science behind demands for a phase out of fossil fuels. COP president denies he doesn't respect climate science. You don't want COP president denies on any of the stories about all these things. But these are the big stories coming out of COP, and that's a deeply unfortunate thing. Today's guest is my friend Andy Kubrin. He has done a lot of great work with the Citizens Climate Lobby of Canada. He runs a blog I read all the time, and you should too, Alberta Beyond Fossil Fuels, that advocates for a fossil fuel phase out in Alberta, Canada, and features deep dives into the economics, ethics, and liabilities of the fossil fuel industry. Andy, how are you?
I'm doing well, Steve, and thanks so much for having me on your show today.
You betcha. Well, I mean, I guess I'll just start I'll just give you a chance to respond to COP President Al Jaber. Is there really no science behind the demands for the phase out of fossil fuels?
So I think no. I mean, I think the answer is yes, there is ample science behind the phase out, the call for a phase out of fossil fuels. I am not a climate scientist myself. I do defer to the experts, but the experts are overwhelmingly united in the call for a phase out. We need to get on with it.
Right, right. And so, you know, that's just one of the results of this of really what appears to be in many ways a big oil takeover of COP. It's been a steady thing over the years where there's more and more representation of oil and gas, but I feel like it's really culminated in this one. You know, in this one, we've got that's an oil and gas guy right at the top, and there's more delegates than ever, and so what do we do about a big this trend that's going on where like this is our big moment for climate people, where a lot of things are supposed to happen, and you know, the thing that we end up hearing is big oil needs a seat at the table. Well, it seems like they're driving the bus right now, and so how do we counter that?
Yeah. Well, you know, first, it's not just your imagination or anyone else's imagination. The influence of the fossil fuel lobbyists on COP is greater than ever. I read recently that there are something like 4 times as many fossil fuel lobbyists attending this event than ever before. The number is in the hundreds. So the influence is definitely taking place. And I don't think that the word hijacking is too strong a word for this situation.
Right.
Fossil fuel lobbyists have hijacked this conference. But I think, important though the conference is, it's just a passing moment. And when it's over, we have work to do.
Right.
It seems to me that there's a mismatch between power and accountability, and between attention and accountability. Right now, the spotlight is on COP, and seemingly powerful people are up there. They seem to hold our fate in their hands, but I don't think that's actually the case, because climate action comes through national, provincial, and municipal representative bodies. It comes through legislatures. So we have work to do there.
Yeah, without a doubt. You know, I mean, going back to whether there is science behind the demands for the phase out of fossil fuels, and you know, we're both very comfortable saying that yes, it seems like all the climate scientists that I listen to very much believe that this is a necessity. I guess to flip that on its head, can Canada achieve its climate targets with Alberta having an approach that industry can any limiting of industry's ability to extract oil from the ground and have it burned, and new production, is that possible? Is there any science there that says that we can just let these folks pull out as much as they want?
No, there is no science to support that view. You know, how to put this? There's such greenwashing going on, right? But let's talk about Alberta fossil fuels and our exports.
Please.
Yeah, so I mean, we produce a great amount of fossil fuels. We ship 80% of our crude oil to the United States. We ship a large quantity of our gas there also, and perhaps to some other destinations. So people can point out, they can say, well, Alberta only produces a fraction of the world's emissions, but a very small percent of the world's emissions. But Alberta all by itself is the world's 4th largest producer of crude oil. and Alberta by itself is roughly the 11th largest producer of gas. So the amount of CO2 that originates in our soil in this province is enormous, even if it is counted against other nations, other jurisdictions' greenhouse gas inventory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and ultimately, if Canada wants to achieve its net zero 2050 targets, that's one of the reasons that you started up the blog, Alberta Beyond Petroleum. We can't make it if Alberta continues doing what it does.
That's absolutely true. And so, there's a lot of attention paid to the Pathways Alliance and to its plans to capture CO2 and sequester it in that large hub that they're planning to construct around Cold Lake. And, I took a closer look at that situation last week, and I noticed that Pathways Alliance is saying, we will sequester 10 to 12 million tons of CO2 per year. And you think, at first you might think, wow, 10 to 12 million tons of CO2, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so great. I have done the calculations. And if you look at the life cycle emissions of our fuels, it's just 1% of our annual output.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's disastrous. And they want something like $50 billion, I think, of Canadian taxpayer dollars to develop that system that, doesn't take care of the scope 3 emissions, which are the emissions of the product actually getting used by the consumer.
That's
so
exactly right.
that's 50 billion Canadian taxpayer dollars to go on top of whatever they're going to spend on a process that doesn't do what we need done. And they don't try to ever make the claim that they're capturing those scope 3 emissions.
No, but that is what needs to decline. We need to phase out fossil fuels.
Right. So, I mean, when the whole, it's like there's a lot of countries around the world. It's like the big moonshot on climate solutions. The big thing that they're putting all their money on, it seems like, a lot of times, is this carbon capture thing. And you and I feel like maybe it's a bit of a boondoggle, or, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I think. And I certainly think that, I'm with the common climate activist belief that this is all just a holding pattern, so oil and gas can continue to pull out as much money as they can out of both the ground and the governments around it. But while all of that happens, that's funding that isn't going to solutions that, for example, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have called carbon capture the least effective and most expensive. So if we're spending money on the least effective and most expensive, that's at the expense of the other more effective solutions, right?
Absolutely true.
Yeah. So that's another reason that we can all be a little skeptical here. And then I don't know if you've had a chance. It was only just the other day, Ottawa has released language around a framework for an emission cap. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a framework. It's not yet codified. It's not yet law. But my initial take on it is that it is a significant step forward.
Yeah.
I mean, they're talking about cutting emissions, and let's be clear, they are only talking about scope 1 and scope 2 emissions within our boundaries, but
Right.
they're talking about cutting that 35 to 38% below 2019 levels. It's not enough, but it's a good step forward. We should absolutely support this.
Yeah. No, I think it sounds like it's a good start anyways, but there's always reasons to look in and be a little cynical throughout all of this, right? So but I'm glad that you've got a positive inkling on it. I guess the other, while we're talking about carbon capture, the prime language, the debate that's going on at COP is phase out versus phase down. And the other phrase is what was I going to say there?
Is it?
Unabated.
Unabated.
Yeah, unabated. Right. So maybe do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I do, and thank you for asking about these things.
Sure.
Phase down, the phrase phase down is an evasion.
Yeah, right.
It's an evasion. I carry a few extra pounds around my midsection, unfortunately.
I got some of those same pounds, I can tell you.
Yeah. I keep swearing I'm going to phase that down someday.
Yeah, right.
And so, no, phase down means really nothing. It means, think about reducing maybe someday, somehow, when it's convenient. So we need a phase out, not a phase down.
Right.
When they talk about phasing out unabated fossil fuels, they are only talking about that very limited benefit from carbon capture and sequestration, right? They are talking about capturing, as I said earlier, about 1% of the life cycle emissions of our fuels. That just is not going to cut it. We need to stop burning fossil fuels.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so that's the big challenge. That's the big, the sort of the prime debate left to have happen. Although that said, in previous COPs they have not even mentioned fossil fuels, and so there is an inkling of progress. And again, it ties into this whole hope versus cynicism thing. There's things to be hopeful about, and there's things to be cynical about. You're fairly active getting your content out via the Alberta
Beyond Patrol,
it's beyond fossil fuels, right? Via your socials, etc. Are you noticing on those socials that it seems like quite a lot of the climate talk for 2023 is around the oil industry? Because I know for myself, it's certainly this year more than ever. It seems like people are very much aware that this is where the real problem is, and this is what folks seem to be talking about. Is that something you're noticing as well?
Yes, I mean, that's absolutely right. COP28 is the occasion when the idea of phase out is going to be ushered onto the world stage. It's going to receive more attention than ever before. We won't cut a deal about fossil fuel phase out, or if we do, we're going to have to fight really hard to actually make it happen. But it's the beginning of a change, and we all need to speak up about it, share this idea with our friends, with our families, and with our elected officials.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. The other day in my show yesterday, while I was chatting, I had come up with a potential solution for COP, and I want to try it out on you, but I also want to, maybe something occurs to you as well. But certainly heading into COP this year, it's one thing for it to be hosted in a petrostate. It's another thing, to be hosted in a state where protest isn't really allowed, and that maybe does any of the media even feel safe in a room asking a Sultan Al Jaber the hard questions? There's all of that piece, but when I had heard that they had put an oil company executive in charge, I felt like it was a slap in the face of every climate activist on the planet. And then when I'm the most angry at John Kerry, American climate envoy for the president, for saying the effusive praise he put on this man who's already made a ridiculous person out of John Kerry due to his actions and due to the headlines coming out of this. And so to me, I feel like one of the big unanswered questions is, what do we do about this? How do we fix this? How do we, like, this is, the work has to be done at the local level and the federal levels for sure, but this is the big global moment for climate. And, at the same time, this is a United Nations beast, this COP process. And, to me, when I think about the United Nations, I think, like, whatever you think of bureaucracies, this is bureaucracy times bureaucracy. You've got countries instead of people trying to make all these things work, but clearly a fix is required. And to me, when I was just off the cuff, one of the thoughts that I had was, if you want to be an oil company and attend COP28, there are certain standards that you must be able to demonstrate that you are, a sincere partner in all this. And, Alberta sent 150 people to go and sell oil and gas over there. So to me, I feel like there's got to be a fix. And I think climate activists the world over should be thinking about fixes. If you care about COP and you've been paying attention to COP, I think we owe it to ourselves and to the world and to the future to think about, how do we fix COP? And so that's the idea that I have, but I don't know if anything occurs to you. How do we stop this process from being taken over like it has been?
Yeah. So I do want COPs to continue, if only for the reason that, as some others have pointed out, this is the one chance for people of the global South to get on stage and call out their oppressors, call out the people who are inflicting all this climate damage on them. So it's that aspect of COP is very valuable. I think our work of fixing COP is not going to take place within COP itself. It will take place around it. We have to exercise power where we have power. We are Calgarians, we are Albertans, we are Canadians. And there are levers that we can pull to bring pressure to bear on our representatives. We should be burning up the telephone lines, calling them. We should be wearing out the carpets in their offices, visiting them.
Yeah.
And we should be very firm and clear. Yes, be nice and polite, but also firm and assertive about what we want and what we need. We need a fossil fuel phase out.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I was listening to what you're saying, but I also, the back of my brain was taking away. So I have another idea. And I'm thinking what I'm going to do, Andy, by the time all is said and done, I'm going to have my master list of COP fixes. And, that doesn't go through a United Nations process. That's something I just get to say, well, do this, and nobody will listen to me. Well, we'll see what happens. But I feel like another fix might be that, because you think about, just as you were saying, the oil companies can send as many lobbyists as they want. They've got all the money in the world. But one of the stories that we keep hearing is about these delegates from the poor countries, where their numbers are dwarfed by oil delegates. And that's just another totally glaring climate injustice. And a similar thing would be climate advocates like you and me. I can't afford to fly to Dubai. I can't afford to even give up work during that time. I can't. I just that's not available to me. So perhaps another fix is that for if you're an energy company and you're going to be flying a lobbyist over there, you must also fly a climate activist over there.
Oh,
and do you like that idea?
I do like that idea. That's a wonderful idea. Imagine they should sit next to each other, and by all means put the activist up in first class so they can at least have a comfortable ride. And
I like the whole sitting beside you thing too. That's good.
Yeah, let's have some interesting conversations.
Right. Yeah. So anyways, the fix COP, I mean, let's just christen it right now. #FixCOP. That's what we're going to start pushing around here. Okay, you know what? we'll start to wrap it up here, but as I mentioned to you, we're going to be launching a podcast this month with kind of a retrospective for 2023, as a lot of folks end up doing during that month. So we're asking for the best and worst on climate of 2023, according to Andy Kubrin. But of course, the point that you made, I've made actually in the last couple of days as well. Let's start with the worst and then end with the best, so we have a positive. We can leave with a positive taste in our mouths before our lunch today. So
Okay.
So to start with, to you, what stuck out to you as 2023's low moment on climate, or the worst of 2023?
Well, the worst of 2023 was the string of disasters we experienced throughout spring and summer. It was heartbreaking. We had smoke in the air every day for days on end. There were just awesome fires and floods all around the world. Many lives were lost. That one event in Libya took 10,000 lives. And so I want to point out that because Alberta is a significant producer of fossil fuels, some of that is on us. And if you're not comfortable living with that, then you should absolutely make a noise about it.
Agreed. I agree with every letter of that. Okay, I presume that's the worst. What do you got for the best of 2023?
Well, for the best of 2023, I think the news is something that has just come out in the last several days. The federal methane regulations, which aim to reduce methane emissions by 75% by 2030, that is huge. That is an immense step forward, and it will have it will take effect very soon, because methane has such a large impact, but it's so short-lived in the atmosphere. So that's important. The other one is the emissions cap, which was announced just the other day. This talk of reducing, by 38%, 35 to 38% below 2019 levels. That's also very important. And it brings me back to the point that an issue we've been touching on all throughout the show. Accountability is a very important issue. We need to hold our legislatures are at the national and provincial level, and in our city council, we need to hold them accountable. That power is within our hands.
Excellent. So for Andy Kubrin's best of 2023, that's an in Canada story there. I love it. Thank you so much, Andy. Again, thanks for the work that you do out there. The blog is Alberta Beyond Fossil Fuels. You should check it out. I read it all the time. There's a lot of great work in there. I'm sure you'll end up forwarding this show along through that through your process as well. But thanks for coming on and all the great work you do, Andy.
Well, right back at you, Steve. Thank you and the Hub for all the great work you do. You're making a huge difference in this town.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, and I'll be sure to pass that on. That concludes today's show, but the live coverage continues every day, all day on the Calgary Climate Hub socials. And Andy talked about it a few times today, and I perhaps haven't talked about it enough in the last few days. One of the key things that you can do around COP28 on climate, or any day on climate, is engage with your elected leaders and let them know what's important to you. So in that spirit, I'll just mention that tomorrow, December 9, for the Global Day of Action for Climate Justice, our good friends at the Alberta Environmental Network and the awesome Alberta Talks project are doing a phone canvass of Albertans to encourage them to express their opposition to things like the widely unpopular CleanEnergy moratorium and demand exactly the kind of climate action we've been talking about here today. So if you check in our show notes or wherever you initially saw this video, we're going to make sure that you have the link so that you can reach out and you can learn how to help get Albertans active. Very quickly, I'll just mention, I'm trying to close the show, but I do want to mention that time and time again, we see polling reveals that most Albertans want to see diversification. Most Albertans want to see climate action. Most Albertans think we should both prosper and lead from it. And that's a thing that time and time again, our leadership of any stripe has failed to understand and capitalize on. So December 9th, Global Day of Action for Climate Justice. Alberta Environmental Network's got you covered. Thanks again to Andy Kubrin, and thank you to you, the viewers. Thanks for caring about the right things. We'll see you tomorrow.